I'm the superintendent of schools, really excited to have our second session this evening, excited that you're all here. This is an official public meeting because our school board members are here as well. And so I'm going to allow Marcia to sort of kick us off as the board chair.
And so the only thing I do as board chair is ask my trustees if it's okay if we slightly modify the agenda, and we'll have public comment at both the beginning and the end of the meeting because not everyone may be able to stay till 8 o'clock. Is that okay with trustees around the room? Sure. So with that, I'll ask for any public comment on a non-agenda item, and the agenda item is strategic planning. And so if you have any comments, you could go to the back podium. It looks like it's on. And if you can introduce yourself, and if you have an unusual spelling of either your first or last name, spell it for our recording. And then try to limit your comments to about 3 minutes since we have a lot of work to get to tonight. So any public comment on a non-agenda item? One person? Okay.
I'm not sure if this is technically a non-agenda item, but I have to leave to go to a chorale rehearsal, and so I wanted to take just a few minutes to state my interest in what you're doing, your strategic planning, before I have to leave. So I appreciate your putting up with that. I will be as quick as possible. Hang on while I grab my sheet here. I'm Kent Watson. I'm a resident of Missoula, a landscape architect, parent. I've been involved with various things relative to the school district over a number of years. I believe we can all agree on two important facts. Our future is in our children, and second, our Mother Earth is in crisis. The first premise is obvious to this board and its supporting faculty and staff. You all work daily to produce forward-thinking and high-achieving students. To some, the second premise may be less obvious. While some may choose to ignore this crisis, it is truly upon us. As an example, the recently concluded Big Sky Documentary Film Festival here in Missoula kicked off its 10-day program of outstanding films excuse me, with a showing of the 95-minute The Story of Plastic. The film brought into focus the alarming human-made crisis of a world overflowing with toxic material that threatens the life and health of animals, humans, and civilization on Earth. As a still practicing landscape architect and lifelong environmentalist, I am deeply concerned that we're collectively overlooking the importance of instilling in our youth the value of the natural environment that surrounds us all. I firmly believe that the Missoula County Public Schools can play a key role in addressing this crisis by educating our future leaders about the role of our natural environment in affecting all human activity. In my view, the district's 21st Century Initiative, under the heading of Transform Learning Environments, provides a directive towards adopting this principle when it states, transform the concept of school from a physical place bounded by rigid schedules to a dynamic learning environment supported through emerging technologies, flexible planning and scheduling, repurposed facilities, and community collaboration. That's a direct quote from the website. I would propose, therefore, 4 items that the MCPS should consider as it moves towards its strategic planning. 1, adopt a policy establishing that the MCPS recognizes the value of the natural environment as the basis for all life forms and is therefore an overarching principle and guiding force for all its activities. 2, incorporating a pledge similar to the current Pledge of Allegiance in each of the classrooms. I have a draft of that which I could read if I had time, but I'll leave it for you to mull over later. 3, review all existing schools and their grounds to determine review all existing schools on their grounds to determine whether improvements can be made that removes traditional landscaping in order to incorporate natural playgrounds, gardens, and native habitats into the total school experience. And then 4, consider all school buildings and their grounds as an integrated and seamless teaching unit that reflects their context within the greater Missoula County setting. And this is best achieved through thoughtful site planning and design for all new and rebuilt facilities. I base these comments on my experience as a landscape architect and engaged parent who worked with the students, faculty, staff, and parents to create and install the Outdoor Discovery Corps at Lewis and Clark School in 1997 and 2000. And a few of you here remember that. And I once again thank Karen Allen for really being the spark plug to help make that happen. Thank you.
And now I'll take my seat as just part of the strategic planning community and introduce Deborah Silk, who's here from Helena, from the Montana School Board Association, and she's our facilitator for the evening.
Thank you, Marcia. Welcome back, those of you that were here for our first session. I see a lot of familiar faces. I'm excited that we have this core group back together again. And you'll remember when we met in the latter part of January, we worked pretty furiously through a couple of exercises, right? Does anybody remember what we did? Anyone want to give an overview? This is a test to determine whether or not any of you remembered what we actually did last time.
Look at the vision statement.
Yep. We were focusing on really that circle, the core purpose and core values of Missoula County Public Schools. We're not going to go back and revisit that, but I want you to be thinking about the discussions that you had at your tables in the latter part of January as we move forward. I have reviewed all of the notes that we gathered after that meeting, and just as a summary, I think this group has determined that the mission statement needs some work. You want it to be more inspiring. You want the words his and her to be removed. And you want it to be all-encompassing in terms of a holistic approach to each and every student that enters your school doors. That's sort of a broad-based overview. And remember, I also rushed you through core values. Do you guys remember that speed dating exercise? We don't really have time to go back and review that, but I have enough based upon the input to, I think, revise those. And my plan is when we meet for the third session, I will bring those drafts back for you, not for the purposes of rehashing old things, but just as a reminder where we are at that point in time. We do have, how many of you were here for our session on January 23rd? We're here. And how many of you were not here for that session? This is your first time. Okay, so we're going to do like we did last time. For those of you sitting around the edges of the room, what we want you to do is to pull up a chair and incorporate yourselves into the tables that exist here, because we want you to be part of this working group as opposed to just sitting and observing, okay? And once we do that, when we get started, I want you to introduce yourselves to the people that you are working with, because there's going to be new people at different tables, and I think just take a few minutes and do introductions. So,
what we may do is ask the front table to just move yourselves forward just a little so we can make space for people to be around both sides of the tables. We never know exactly how many people are going to show up, so as you're making space for guests to come in, you're just going to make space on both sides of the tables. Awesome.
you guys can move up further if you want. I don't
Yeah, you guys can go back. They can get well done. Hey babe, will you just watch the filter chair on my You're gonna be okay. Well, we can
Has everyone had a chance to introduce yourselves? Yes? Is that how I knock this to get their attention? Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and get started. You'll have lots of opportunities to visit with one another. And I want to make a distinction between the work that we did in January and the work that we're doing tonight. The work that we did in January was not goal-driven. The work that we did in January was identifying the core ideology of this district. Core purpose, core values, those are not goals. Those are what you stand for and the values that you aspire to, okay? How many of you remember the exercise that I gave you in the homework assignment before you left last time? Anybody?
To read the district, yeah, the like meat of the, I don't know.
Of the progress that they had made over the course. That was one of the homework assignments. The other homework assignment that I gave you was to think about the long-term envisioned future of this district. You guys remember that now? Does it ring a bell? Because, and the reason that I asked you to go home and think about that is because when you come into these types of work sessions, the exercise that we're going to do tonight tends to be difficult for people to get their heads wrapped around, okay? So when you're looking at this continuum, and I referenced this when I was here in January, forget about the 30 years up there, okay? What we're really going to be talking about tonight is the long-term envisioned future of this district using about a 10 to 15 year time frame, okay? And there are two parts to this, so I'm going to very quickly go through this. Last time in January, we focused on the top of this, who we are, what we stand for, right? This meeting, we're going to talk about where you're going, where you want to go on a long-term basis. And one of the things that I am always asked when I'm facilitating these sessions are we looking at where we think we're going to be if we just maintain the status quo? Or are we supposed to be thinking about things that we presume are going to happen to us if we don't adequately plan ourselves? Okay? And we all know, for those of you that have been around the education field for a number of years, when districts don't plan for themselves, what happens? Anybody know? Two things happen. All you're doing is reacting to what's going on now, okay? The second thing that happens is someone else does your planning for you, okay? So it's really important when you're talking about a planning process, and some of you might be saying, why aren't we talking about 3 to 5 year goal areas? Anybody sitting here thinking about why are we not discussing that? Because that's not long-term strategic planning. Again, think about how quickly 3 to 5 years goes by. That's just reacting to what's going on now. And so what you guys are going to be faced with tonight in terms of your discussions is really looking at, and let me pull up this slide here because this is the same slide PowerPoint that we used last time. And you guys will remember these exercises, right? And the little test that you went through to see if you passed the smell test, right? Everything ringing a bell now? So this is what we're going to focus on tonight. And again, it's not easy to do, and it requires, number one, thinking outside of the box. The best sessions that I've had when we're talking about long-term envisioned future, and again, you're talking about 10 to 15 years out, are for those people that have some wild and crazy ideas, right? And they're afraid to state what those wild and crazy ideas are because they're going to think that the people that they're sitting with think that they're crazy, okay? If you have ideas about where you think this district is going or where you want it to go, if you're a parent, a grandparent, how many students? I know we have students in here today. Yep, I saw you guys walk in. Glad that you guys are here. So what I want you to be thinking about, even for the students that are sitting in this room, and remind me, what grade are you in?
I'm a senior.
Senior? What about you? Okay. So you guys can also be thinking about and shedding perspective on your own experience that you've had in this public school system, right? And what you would like to see changed for those students that are coming after you, okay? So you want to be thinking about long-term Envision future in two aspects. Number one, what do we want for the experience of our students, okay? And number two, where do we want them to be when they're getting ready to go on to their next stage of life, okay? It's not just about the next step. It's about the experience that they have while they're here in this school system. So there's actually two parts to this, but you're going to discuss it in one session. Number one, I want you to talk about this big, audacious goal, okay? And when you're talking about big, audacious goal, don't just restate the obvious. Well, we want to continue this and we want to continue that. You're probably going to continue some things that you're doing really well, okay? But you have to be thinking about, in a perfect world, if you had all of the human resources available to you, if you had all of the financial resources available to you, if you put in a ton of hard work and sprinkled a little bit of good luck in there, where could you take this district in 10 to 15 years? In other words, think about what the summit of Mount Everest looks like, okay? That's what I want you to identify. And then I want you to have discussions about what it actually looks like, okay? From all aspects. What does it look like from a physical plant perspective? What does it look like from a technology perspective? What does it look like from a student perspective? What does it look like from a staff perspective? What does it look like from a curriculum, extracurriculum, opportunities for students? Okay, so I want you to drill down and vividly describe as best you can what you want it to look like. Anybody know why we do that? Because if you have a big audacious goal out there and you don't vividly describe what you want it to look like, it's very easy to let yourselves off the hook, right? Okay, so that's why we want you to articulate what it is that you think this school district can be in 10 to 15 years, okay? So that's the first exercise, and we're going to do similar to what we did last time. Do we have flip charts and markers?
Yeah, the
Okay.
markers are on the table, we'll pass out
Okay.
the flip chart.
So again, we're going to have discussions, and listen, there are no right or wrong discussions, responses, or answers, okay? And I think I said that when I was here last time, and it's true. Make sure that you're participating in the discussion, even if you think you have wild ideas and everyone's going to disagree with you. Put them on the table, okay? So same thing, we're going to have paper and markers. You're going to have discussions, and then we're going to report out, and then we're going to try and get through another exercise tonight before I let you go at 8 o'clock. How does that sound? Okay? Everybody ready to get to work? All right, sounds good. And I'll walk around if you need help. Just take the whole thing?
Well, we ran out of one. It's not long enough. We just, if you had the. Jumbo.
I'm going to give you about 5 more minutes to discuss, and then we'll report out. Is everyone ready to report out? Yes? I know you could continue your discussions. Hold up. Perfect. Thank you, Mike. So I know that you could continue with your discussions, but one of my jobs is to keep you on task and get you out of here on time, okay? So let's start with the table in the back that stood up and did their work and see what you guys came up with. It looks like you're on the spot, so.
Nick, can you move over?
That's right, Rob. Robin's been.
So let's listen up and see what that table came up with.
So the diagram that Todd developed,
It's a diagram.
Speaks for itself.
looked at education beginning at 0 and going on for one's entire life. And as Mike pointed out, there's no exit point from it. You either drift away but need to find your way back for completing a traditional education, or you zip through it at a high speed, or other variations. And any of us that have more than one child know that everyone finds their own path through that. So I would say that was the critical thing. We were asking for more flexibility and maybe blurring some boundaries between school and community. There was some discussion of what if our schools feel more like community centers instead of this kind of custodial care from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Well, because we had arts and people advocating for play, feeling like that needs to be our focus, not more test scores. Anything else that I'm forgetting? Oh, yes. So some people at our table came from communities where there was only one school. And so there was a sense of every child had the same experience because they, no matter where they lived in the community, they all came together to the same place. And there is concern in our community that we have a high level of segregation, economic segregation, and we would like to eradicate that in 15 years.
Nice job.
Fair enough?
Any questions or comments about what you heard? No? And what about your table?
So as we looked at this, kind of going through our thought, we started with, we wanted students to have the diplomas plus additional launch pads, either like an associate's degree or some service work or apprentices or some other work experience other than just the educational. We talked about a fully funded pre-K in our city, large intervention funding close to in the K2 area prior to gaps becoming too large. Then we talked about focus on a whole child, so mental health, emotional, global purposes, integration, and that type of stuff in the classroom. We would need resources to be able to get that in collaboration with like the university to have our teachers having the possible trainings that we need to incorporate that into our curriculum. We talked about technology a little bit. Then we had the community-centered idea as well, focusing on family support for all students, maybe our schools being more centered based on that. And then our big pie in the sky, our teacher-to-student ratio of 15:1. All.
Any questions or comments at that table? No? What about the second to the last table on this side?
I was elected as the spokesperson for our group. And the first thing that came up, it just popped into everybody's head right away, was zero waste. That in 15 years, the entire school district should be a zero waste school district. And that takes some time, so that means starting now. We also like to have every student reading by 3rd grade. Apparently that's not happening right now. Smaller class size, there was a little debate about that in our group. We talked about zero discipline issues, which kind of bloomed into a lot of talk around what does that mean when you don't have discipline issues? Does that mean we have more engaged students? Does that mean we have social emotional learning curriculum, MBIA positive instruction? Do we potentially have less punitive measures and more supportive measures in place? And can that be consistent across the district? I think it's kind of the same as the whole student approach, a more holistic approach, that hopefully the outcome is less discipline issues. We talked about more student engagement and how it relates to attendance, that students who feel valued and that they're part of a community will potentially want to be there, be in class. Talked about opportunities for leadership throughout the district, from students through all the way up, and that could be through principals, teachers, students. Yeah. Career readiness, college access, global citizenship. This was a discussion about where do we want the students to be at the end of their school career. There was talk about, do we want to have some flexibility in terms of what's next for them? 2-year, 4-year, gap year, the trades. How do we have a system in place to help them through that transitional period into being productive members of society? We talked about the kinds of learning that happens in the classrooms: transdisciplinary learning, more project and problem-based, inquiry-based learning. We talked about having the best possible technology that would support learning. We talked about the places where learning happens: LEED buildings, LEED certified, which is a energy, maybe you all know this. We also talked about having buildings that are prepared for the climate that is changing, and that we have spaces where there's clean air for students, there's indoor spaces to play when it's hot, when it's smoky, so that that kind of activity can still continue in a safe place. We talked about more engaged families that are engaged in their students' lives in their learning. That could connect to the having all 3rd graders being able to read. Amplifying student voice throughout the school career. We talked about universal pre-K and a rich professional development model that implements best practices so that teachers are the most prepared they can be to fully engage their students.
Good. Nice job. Any questions or comments of that table? No? What about the group over here? The group had tricked me into thinking that you guys really weren't writing on your
We had multiple ideas and multiple conversations even going on at once at our table. It was pretty exciting. So I'll apology if I miss anything. We feel like agency is a really, really big thing in terms of cultivating agency within students to not only be active citizens when they graduate, but far before they graduate, to help to cultivate the leadership qualities and the care and the commitment to being active citizens, which also means being more involved in their communities. So I think we related some with community. I had kind of a big idea, which was to, and we summed it up with cultivate locally and globally minded citizens. For me, I feel like it's really important to integrate everything about the school with the reality that we're living in a very unpredictable world. Not only ecologically, but also politically, culturally, socially. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world. And so in order to raise students who can participate in that process in a confident and flexible way, that's got to be the priority of the system, the school system. And so we talked about integrating sustainability not only into the buildings, into what the schools purchase. I mean, how thoughtful are the purchases in terms of being recycled items, for example, or no waste items. The curriculum could reflect these concerns about sustainability, and also literally just, I guess, the whole school could be really a model for students as far as how things are done in the classroom, what they're talking about, and how the school runs. We talked about connecting rural and urban kids who in Missoula were kind of, I guess, the urban kids, a lot of us here who are here, and then the rural, maybe connecting more with rural communities like out in Glasgow you were saying, and other parts of the state. We want to have a 100% graduation rate, and we feel that is related to having multiple, let me write this down, multiple paths to success. So not all the students are funneled towards college, but there are, trades are more included, and that's all I know about that. Let's see, flexible, adaptable, problem solvers, that's what we want to raise, those kind of people, starting from the beginning. Curious, caring, critical thinkers. And then we hear, let's see, digital human connections. We want to cultivate, I think this relates to globally minded citizens as well as having, oh, you should talk about this. You wrote it down.
Plug and unplug. We want kids to be like digitally connected, but we also want kids to unplug at the same time.
Yeah, and know what it is to be in relationship with each other, relationship with their own thoughts, their feelings, their beings in this unpredictable world, and being able to connect to their local landscape. One thing we talked about, the last thing is, or I brought up, is the Farm to College program at the University of Montana. I helped to found it when I was a graduate student, and it's really been amazing to see how that program, which initially was like, oh, really fringe, really edge thing, but it's become a huge point of pride at the university, not only for the money they pour into our Montana economy through supporting local producers, but also for the wildlife habitat that's being preserved, and for the education of all the students who go through the food zoo at the university, learn about what it means, what it tastes to eat local, and what it means to participate that way. So I thought, why not let the elementary students and the middle schoolers and the high schoolers get to do that too.
Good, nice job. Questions or comments? No? You guys are being easy on one another. What about the third table up here? Or, yeah. Losing track of where we are here.
Thank you. You noticed I wasn't that tall, did you? It's true, my whole life. Right here. we're starting to get to the part of the evening where we've got some repeats, so I'll try not to dwell on those too much, but it's still worth pointing out. Our group wanted to see an education system that's not limited to age, grade, demographics. So essentially what we're looking at is a continuum of education that is flexible for students. So it's not 182 days here and 182 days here and 182 days here. Some students will move through that a lot more fluidly, and later on we talked about how our buildings would have to accommodate that somehow, and our scheduling and all those things, and that's a lot of the how. We didn't want to get clogged up on the details of that, but that education can be more flexible. So slow, fast, and that's going to change for each kid as they go through the system. We talked about having the schools mimic the community as well, so bringing that community feel as part of the school and modeling a community in the school environment. Our student participant was kind enough to talk about safety, which I can't believe hasn't been mentioned yet. I'm shocked. I thought that'd be the first thing to get tripled up on. So not only did we talk about the physical system, but it's more like feeling safe at school. So not the how thick are the walls and how bulletproof is the glass, but how do I feel? Do I feel safe walking from one class to the other? Do I feel safe going to a football game? Do I feel safe in my classroom right now? Am I afraid once in a while of the alarm that goes off and what that might mean? Yeah. So all those different aspects of a safe school, I think, were brought up at our group. Did I miss anything on that? Okay. We want income and ethnicity to not be predictors of success for a student. We don't want that to have anything to do with how well a student's going to do or how fast they're going to go. We want the influence of trauma to be a thing of the past. I know, big, hairy, and audacious, but that's something we can all work for. Pre-K and beyond, again, that's personalization, and from the earliest age, we want to start bringing those practical skills, what we're calling the trades and everything, but bring some of those life-type skills back into school. Do you know how to operate the right end of a hammer when you leave middle school? I mean, that kind of thing. Can you change a tire when you graduate from high school? All of those, can you cook an egg? You know, like those are things that schools can bring back into the education for all kids. Not just if you're interested, take that, but here, I'm going to teach you how to use a screwdriver. It turns this way. Like that's an important skill, and we think schools can do that. Let's see, every kid can do everything. We want to have a high value on human interaction, and again, that's that whole technology plug and unplug thing. But this group talked a little bit more in depth about bringing levering the technology where it's appropriate and you don't need that human interaction, which gives more time for the face-to-face. And that's the thing that we keep losing out on, is that face-to-face. How do we talk with one another? Problem solving, I thought, was on this first page too. It is, right there in the corner. And problem solving skills was also brought up by our student participant, which was awesome. It's like, we know lots of things, we know lots and lots of things and lots of details, but we have colleagues that are coming out of our schools that still don't know how to problem solve. Here's your challenge in real life. How do you approach that with the skills that you have from school? So we got to bring that back in. I think I got everything on the first page. I got it. There's that interconnections of the community, a variety of learning environments. Again, the schools as community centers, I've heard that come up a number of times. Talk about part of that flexibility might be different learning at different types of the day, different learning at different types of the year, depending on what fits best for the student, whether that's longer year, shorter year, school year round, but don't take that the wrong way. Kids learn better at different times, and there's certain things you can only learn at certain times of the school year. Try doing ag only in December. It's really hard to grow corn in December in Montana. It's super tough. And then the zero waste thing. That's what we got. Did I miss anything, group? All right.
Questions or comments? No? Okay.
For you guys, so is it a good summary to say that you're kind of encouraging a system that would be, the students would be self-paced and self-focused in a way, and the teachers would be more of support to help guide?
I think we didn't really necessarily speak about that. We definitely spoke about the opportunities for different speeds, and I think that would we did have, where the kids, instead of having options A, B, C, D, and having this child pick that one, that child pick that one, say, well, let's have more than just those options. And then we did have some talk about students bringing their own options to the table. So a little bit about that, but not necessarily as student-driven, but that certainly would come out of
Right,
kind of the big
to
picture.
some degree. Okay, thanks.
Okay,
All right.
you're up.
Okay, so our table's pretty much all high school, so we ended up focusing on that, my apologies. And we had a lot of the same ideas everyone else has. One of our members is a really big proponent of the academies and really spoke passionately about that. The problem with an academy being at one school is that only those students in that neighborhood get that opportunity. So we would like to look at, fluidity was our big word in our group. And so our big audacious idea for high school is to not have Sentinel, Big Sky, and Hellgate anymore. We have one school in Missoula. We don't mean close the buildings. What we're saying is we are Missoula County Public School again, and we run shuttle buses between the campuses. And if you take ag for part of the day, you just hop on the little, we were looking at the U-Dash shuttles. You hop on the Dash shuttle and you run over to Big Sky and you take your couple classes there, and maybe math happens here at this school, so you hop back on the shuttle and you run over to math, and the same thing, you get to kind of go in and out of where you need to be. If you're falling behind in a class, you can just switch to another group. Maybe math is taught at the same time everywhere, so you can go different places. We just feel like our district is really fractured right now because there's so much going on at every different school. And if you don't go to if you don't go here, you don't get language immersion. If you don't go here, you don't get this opportunity. The only thing we do right now is bus for ag and auto. And so we'd like every opportunity open to every student. And so if you take and you make us one school and let the kids go back and forth. We also talked about extended school days. 6 hours is not really enough with our students, and committing to really being there for those kids. I kind of summarized because we had a lot of the same ideas. Anything else that we want to add? What is that? Okay, so yeah, just fluidity was our keyword.
Questions or comments of that table? No? Guess they're going next.
I'm anxious, I can't wait to get up here. Thank you, sir. Good evening. We had a lot of the same themes, but I'll cover them briefly. We right out of the gate, we want zero waste in all schools, which is a huge goal. 95% of student population reaches 6th grade literacy, so we don't have the statistics on what the actual population of students will reach as far as their literacy is concerned, but that's a huge goal for us to strive to get to that benchmark overall. More diversity in teaching. That's obviously a problem that we've all identified as well. We'd like to see that in the classroom. We use the term revamp standardized testing, model K through higher, but the term eliminate actually came up too. So how do we look at a different model to assess our children's performance and their ability to perform? I think we all drive toward the standardized test scores that has been covered. There's data, there's good data on it. We want to look at revamping or eliminating the current standardized test score overall. Equip students to address, engage the challenges of a global society. So, getting outside a little bit bigger picture of Missoula, Montana, even the state of Montana, how do we address and challenge our young students to think globally at a young age? We can certainly do that. Healthier options for students. The freshmen in the group talked about how terrible the food is, how unhealthy it is in high school. So I appreciate the feedback there. We'd like to see some healthier options for our students as well. Services overall, so student health, mental, and behavioral. I'm not the expert on this, but looking at how can we provide better services overall to our students in the class. Thanks, Rob. And the addition of the board this time is actually great. Rob's not holding this up, so I appreciate that. Create a model that engages teachers, parents, and students. And so, we see this a lot in higher ed. There's a lot of folks in here as well that, we spend a lot of time sort of coaching parents as well as they get through the transition to college. But we're really curious about what are we doing to engage and foster that partnership with parents and helping to advance education as well and educate parents on how to best help their teachers or serve in that capacity. Smaller class sizes, another big goal.
to do that, also documented as well. And then healthy response, you guys covered the technology at home and school. If we could just pull the plug on the net, that'd be amazing. If we could just have a blackout time where they could not have that, but healthy response. And so how do we coach and train our kids and some of the challenges they're dealing with now? What did I miss, team? Thumbs up, I'm good, okay, thank you.
Any questions or comments of this table?
I really appreciate that you said parents. I realized as we were talking, that's the first time I actually heard the word parents in all of our tables, including ours. And that's not because our schools aren't doing a lot with parents, because I see a lot of great things happening in the school to try to engage parents. But I think just the nature of the question, we sort of forgot that. Like, we started thinking about what are we going to do in the schools, and here are all the ways we're going to help. And really, a lot of the things that we're suggesting are straightening deck chairs on the Titanic if we're not addressing families, because every elementary school teacher will tell you the disparity, all that kind of stuff starts with the families. So maybe as you're saying that, I just want to kind of emphasize that. Anything we do to strengthen families and parents helps with every other thing we're working on here, whether it's zero waste or whatever, it's at home. Home's got to be part of this big picture wherever we're going.
Thanks. And I'll just plug the higher ed lens as well. My kids are really young, but I think from a parental perspective, we do a ton to educate parents about higher education, and so it's a household buying decision. You look at, it's household investment in a lot of cases. But to your point, there's very little done to coach, I think, parents. My kids are real little, so, to see what that partnership might be for parents. So, we appreciate the comment.
Good, nice comment. All right, this table is up. Who's your speaker?
So we struggled, whoa, I'm just going to step back. Hopefully you can hear me. We struggled with a unifying theme, but we feel like everything fits together regardless, even if maybe we don't have a word for it. But we start out talking about more project-based learning and even getting rid of grades and specific classes and subjects, so that back to that fluidity idea, however we choose to do that. A big piece, and maybe relatively overarching, is this idea of decisions based on the students, not on the finances. And that's really where we started with what does each student need and how can we be more responsive to each student's needs, and at the same time keep the students together, working together, not isolated, and learning, achieving their learning outcomes. So we also talked about sustainability education in the really big picture. So that's in the curriculum, it's in the facilities. It definitely includes zero waste. It includes other pieces as well to that. We talked a lot about leadership for the future and ways to give the kids what they need to go out into, as people have addressed, a very changing world, and feel comfortable with that. We also addressed the issue of trauma-sensitive models, recognizing mental health and other concerns that come up at every grade level. And we don't want to wait until middle school and high school. We talked about having holistic resources in every school at a much greater level for all these students. Yeah, we talked a lot about community integrations, working with the community, working with businesses, working with organizations in the community, especially on those projects. Like, what are real world problems? And have the students at every grade level can go out and solve problems, and then that's how they get engaged in their learning, because they're learning so they can solve the problem, and that's fun. And when they're solving problems together, they feel like they belong and that they're useful, and then the students are coming together instead of being separated out. So it cuts across all those socioeconomic or privileged background concerns that we all have. How do we bring folks together? Technology readiness is very important. A number of people have addressed that, I think, really well. Student ownership of learning is an outcome, maybe, as much as a part of it. We talked about play, discovery, and practice, keeping that part of the mix. Student belonging I had touched on, and then safe schools, both personal, physical, and emotional space for students.
Good, nice job. Questions or comments? No? You're up. I think you were up even if I said that you weren't, but go ahead.
First, I want to say there are 2 seats open on the school board. I don't believe anyone has filed to run. You have until March 25th. Okay. Our group, I'd say that the overarching idea is equity. In 15 years, we want things to be equitable across the district. And I think everything that we followed with led toward equity. Across the district, we have people who are very aware, especially through the boundary study, of the kind of biases that do exist in our district. People are very aware that the housing costs are causing bigger separations of people based on their income. And so the goal here was that the schools would try and override that, and 15 years from now, we would really be one district and every school would have equal status and equal respect. We hit on a lot of the issues that other people brought up. We did end up at the smaller teacher to student ratio. We'd like to see the buildings physically be equitable, and more equitable and fair, or what does it say? Equality and equity aren't necessarily the same things. We'd like to see the resources move toward the need. And I think it's hard, as a trustee, I think that's what we're trying to do already. But our big 15-year goal was equitable across the district.
Any questions or comments? No? Nice job. We should have given you guys an entire flip chart. You had a lot of ideas.
We didn't look at themes. We just threw out specific ideas. So apprenticeships, also we started sort of with high school and went down a little bit. So apprenticeships, work-based learning, internships, job shadowing opportunities, multidisciplinary curriculum, service-oriented learning, more out-of-school experiences, a multicultural curriculum that's sort of integrated through the school year, not just during specific times. Flexible schedules for students and staff, blended online and classroom courses that have engaging activities outside the classroom, individual learning plans for each kid. That's thinking big. And then a safety net within the school to sort of achieve that. So not just setting up sort of a plan for each kid, but then recognizing that when something happens in a kid's family or some kind of factor can interfere, that kids can derail pretty quickly, and just trying to build in more safety nets for kids. Increasing social emotional supports. Thanks, Rob, that's the end of that one. Mentorship opportunities for student to student, like high school students or middle school students doing work in the elementary schools. Leadership opportunities across the school for more kiddos. Multiple pathways to individualized graduation goals, and then again, guidance towards those. So similar to what you guys talked about, not just college readiness, but if you're gonna go into a different field, and then helping to shepherd those kids through so they don't kind of lose track. Leveraging our community partnerships more for some of these big goals that we have, since we have so many great community opportunities. We talked about education being a continuum in Missoula from pre-K to senior citizenship, and that we already sort of have that in place, but expanding that. So pre-K, we all keep talking about pre-K, but also continuing ed at Emma Dickinson, could that be brought to all the schools so that seniors or adult ed can happen in your neighborhood. Seamless communication between parents, students, and district. More outside time, including recess, and also educational and recreational opportunities. Better quality food prepared in-house in each school's kitchen. Buses dropping off students a little bit further away from the school, so starting first thing in the morning, kids are having some active time, even if they're bus riders. Other built-in opportunities for physical activity like that just get built into the day. Extended resource programming at all schools, so if you have a special need, you don't have to go to a school out of your neighborhood. More alternative programs, and I don't remember what we were speaking to specifically, if anyone wants to expand on that at the table. Equal programming across the district. It's very specific, this one. Joint use agreements to open up schools for community use outside of school time. Expanded after school and summer opportunities for all students, which is essentially saying making schools into community centers for their neighborhoods. More fine art opportunities. That's the one my daughter always wants me to throw in. Beyond music, just more art. Trauma-informed programming and training for teachers, and having all the schools be a safe space to learn.
Good, nice job. Any questions or comments at this table?
I agree with the art. It should be a special. Yeah. I think it should. Not once every 6 weeks. Not every one. Throw it in with sound, music and PE.
Okay, good
Then we
point.
can have more art teachers. Also great. And they don't have to do other things.
Did you guys put that on your flip chart? I think it was included in your discussion, right? And sir, you had a comment?
Not a bad idea on this whole list of great ideas. They're all great ideas. I'd like to point out that some of the things that we all pointed out, we're doing. Like, we're not starting from scratch. I think we've got at least the seeds of a lot of these things going on. Maybe the district isn't communicating that as well as we could, but we've got a good start.
Well, and remember what I said last time when I was here, when I was providing an overview. The whole purpose of this process is not to change everything that you're doing, but to tap into the things that you're doing well, communicate them, educate people about them, and also think about making changes moving forward. So, point well taken. Any other questions or yes?
Just have one follow-up, and I won't harp on this again, but just speaking about that parent thing, which kind of just hit me between the eyes when you said that. One of the things, and I love this, I love it that every single person had community somewhere on their sheet, that we really care about community. There's nothing our nation needs more than community right now. I'm so grateful to be surrounded by all the people who care about community. It just makes me want to cry with joy that there's so many good people working on it. I'm grateful for that. But it is true that we talk so much about community, and the parenting keeps coming back to me. Are we preparing these kids to be parents? These kids we have right now are the ones that are going to be the parents in 15 and 20 years. Are we teaching them how to have relationships, how to accept responsibility, how to nurture? Maybe our 15-year plan needs to just, not just community and global and outreach, but like inreach. How do you have really healthy, forgiving relationships in your family? You know? And here's what good fathering can look like, and here's another way that good fathering can look like, and so on.
Good point. Will you make sure that when we do this next exercise, just put that link on your flip chart so that I don't forget that when I'm putting this all together? Any other questions or comments about that? How many of you think that there were some really good ideas moving forward? I thought it was phenomenal. I always enjoy listening to how people want to see the future for their public schools. I think I said this before, I'm an attorney by trade, and facilitating these types of discussions is really inspiring and something that I just absolutely love. So we're going to switch gears here, and I know that, again, trying to get you out of here at 8 o'clock. So the next exercise that you're going to do, because remember, let me back up a minute here. When we're looking at these planning stages, this is what we just discussed, right? Big audacious goal and vivid descriptors of how to get there, okay? And again, forget about this 30-year continuum up here. This is where we're setting 3 to 5 year goals, and we're going to do that during our third session. So in order to bridge the gap, okay, between your long-term envisioned future and your short-term goals, you're going to encounter barriers to your success, right? We're all kidding ourselves if everything that we just talked about is going to be easy peasy. There are going to be challenges that you're going to be faced with getting there. There might also be drivers, things that you can tap into that will help you get to where you want to go, okay? So we're going to be talking about those drivers and those barriers, and we're going to take it in 5 categories. And people might say, well, why do you always use 5 categories? We're going to be talking about what's happening in the area of demographics, what's happening in the area, and let me pull up the slide here, what's happening in the area of business and economic climate, what's happening in the area of legislation and regulation, same thing technology and science, and same thing with politics and social values. And people sometimes think that the last one is an oxymoron, right? So in order to get through this, what I want you to be thinking about is, and there's no exact science on here, you're making assumptions about what will occur in each of these areas that is going to impact your ability to be successful, okay? So there's a lot of issues, demographics, for example, that you can think of, but I want you to specifically focus on, and no more than 5. What in each of those categories, and I'm going to assign them to each table so we can get through this quicker than normally, but no more than 5 factors in those areas that you're assigned that you think are going to be either a barrier to your success or a driver to your success, okay? And again, I will help you with this. So first 2 tables up here, and I want you to work separately. You guys take the area of demographics, okay? No more than 5 factors on your flip chart, because if you get much beyond 5, you're talking about factors that are really of significance to whether or not you're going to be successful. It has to have an impact on Missoula County Public Schools, okay, and the community that you serve. These 2 tables, I want you to take business and economic climate, okay? These 2 tables, I want you to take politics and social values. Technology and science. And the sexy topic of legislation and regulation.
Oh, Mike, we put you at the right table. Yeah, but you know.
Okay, so we're going to go through this pretty quickly. And remember, this is not an exact science, right? You're making assumptions about the future, okay? I can guarantee you, if we sit in this room a year from now, what you have on paper will change, okay? One of the reasons, and I forgot to mention, I think when we first started this exercise, the reason that you want to go through this as part of any planning process is you want to identify issues that are going to impact your ability to be successful. And if all we do through this strategic planning process is look internally, sort of like we were doing with the Envision future, although there were some external factors, you're missing the point in terms of what is going on around you that is going to impact this district in some fashion, okay? So with that, we're going to start up here. You gals go first. What did you come up with in terms of demographics? And I think we probably need to hit the microphone, right?
You got this.
Did she volunteer to be your speaker, or did you delegate that to?
So this is my student that came tonight, and she's in an art of leadership class, so this is her exercise.
I don't know why I'm up here right now. So our first one that we talked about was an increase in diversity, and that can include race and ethnicity, as well as gender and the LGBTQ community. And we saw that as a positive. Second one was teacher scarcity, as probably a negative. The third one was an increase in poverty and also an increase in wealth, which then leads to an increase in disparities. And that was a negative. And the fourth one was population growth around the city. We saw that as it could be either positive or negative, the way you look at it, the way you approach it. And the fifth one was a growth in the feeder schools on the urban fringe, which could also be a positive or a negative, depending on the way that you approach it.
Good.
Yes.
I say you got an A+ for tonight.
think ours are exactly the same. We talked about the growing population of Missoula, both within MCPS's boundaries and also in the rural areas that feed into our high school, and that can be both a positive and a negative towards our goals. We talked about our current lack of diversity in Missoula as a negative on some of our goals, but later talked about potential increase in diversity in our community being positive in the future, and then the increasing economic disparity in Missoula as a negative.
Good, nice job. See how great minds think alike. All right, business and economic climate.
What's that? What's up, dude? Oh, terrible.
All right, we made Scott talk education last time, so it only makes sense that I talk business. Okay, so we didn't either put a plus or negative, but I think it kind of goes back and forth. So one thing we talk about is the rising cost of living. Moving forward in 5 years, the wages most likely won't go up a lot, but the cost of living will continue to go up. A positive being the University of Montana partnership. Hopefully that just improves. Scott's really behind that one. He mentioned, because a lot of us were like, we don't know, maybe a possible recession in 5 years from now, or maybe coming out of recession, and who knows what that will look like, influencing the funding in the community. And then new business investments, so with trainings, investments, and just that partnership with schools. So.
Good, nice job. Russ, looks like you're up.
Okay, we talked about the increase in economic disparity, and you had a great example. Somebody moves in the Rattlesnake, you buy a home, school's full, you get shipped out to Lowell, they have a new student, spot opens, you leave, Lowell's got this transient population, so that economic disparities increase in Missoula. We talked about the strong business support with businesses and just the community in general. Missoula is really good at that, so that's definitely a strength. We feel that business community in Missoula is thriving. Many smaller communities in Montana is the opposite, and they're going the other direction. So we saw that as a huge positive, that our business community is strong. We talked a lot about the lack of workers, both skilled and unskilled, on how many, we're talking about administrators doing lunch duty and bus duty because we can't fill those positions, and teachers covering for the subs shortage, and that's been a huge problem in our schools. And how people want meaningful work, like the new generation kind of looks at some types of jobs differently, and they don't want to do noon duty because it's not meaningful. Where, we take a job. I cleaned the toilets at the University of Montana as a student. That was meaningful. So it seems like our new generation, it needs to have more meaning, and that's causing bigger gaps.
Okay, we had politics and social values. She saw us planning ahead and she switched us to the end, just because she knew. Okay, so one thing that we thought as a driver for a politic and a political social value, Missoula is a very mindful community and cares deeply about things, and we thought this would be a real driver for us in making some meaningful changes in our schools. We thought that as far as politics goes, that talking to the public and getting voting for the funding. I mean, we've been really successful with levies, but that political piece of property taxes is going to be a huge, well, probably, we thought it could be either way, depending on, but we think we need to just keep that in mind. Sustainability, a lot of groups talked about sustainability, and that seems to be a core social value in our city, and we think that that's a positive that will help us make a lot of these changes. And in some ways it could be a barrier. We were talking about busing to different campuses. That's not great for the environment, so that could be something that's an impediment for us. Then we had a really interesting talk. We have a parent in our group, and she felt that parents are not feeling super involved and not feeling like they're part of our schools, and that's going to be a huge barrier to making some changes. And on the other hand, we felt like we had a lot of community members here tonight from businesses that were just itching to get partnerships and itching to do some of those things that we're all talking about wanting. So we felt like we had two sides of the same coin, one being a huge barrier, that parental involvement is not great, and one huge driver that our community business involvement is really strong. And that's, I guess, I don't know how that fit in, social value. And I think that's all we had. Did I miss something? Tradition. Oh, that's the big one. Because we were the table that wanted the one high school for the whole city, and the tradition of having your 3 separate schools and your crosstown rivalries and all of those things, your identity of your neighborhood school is going to be a huge barrier to that change.
Good.
All right.
Nice job. And just so you know, I think you're spot on the community being a driver and the parent involvement being a barrier. Even if you look at the executive summary of the survey, I think you see that reflected in there as well. Yeah. All right.
We think this table did such a good job, we're just going to go with theirs. Thanks for giving us politics. We loved it. It was kind of tough. We had a bit of a discussion about kind of not necessarily politics, but kind of the social values that what we're seeing nowadays as the acceptance of opinion as fact. And we see it as a barrier because we think it's on the rise, and it's stifling kind of the human interaction, some of sort of the better communication. So we put that up there as a barrier, and we hope that it is we're able to overcome that in the future. We also have social media, which is sort of technology, but we're looking at the kind of the use of social media as a social value and how it's contributing to the division of the country and every place, whether it be communities. Social media could be both a barrier and a driver. Just as communication could be a positive or negative, communication is a positive, miscommunication is still a type of communication and is a negative. But social media can bring people together, it can crowdfund, but it can also miscommunicate and spread bad news. And it also, Isaac was bringing up discussion about the echo chambers that we end up in our social media that we see way too much of nowadays. The drivers, we tried to look for some positives. We have some sort of unfinished thoughts down here. The second to last one is involving the youth that we have. We have great faith in our youth. We think that we have hope there, I think. And the way that I put it is, I trust our youth to clean up our mistakes. No pressure. And then the public education was a bit of, it's going to be in the spotlight, good or bad. It's much more of a focus now that we see. 50 years ago, it just happened, I think, and there wasn't much community involvement. We talked about all the community involvement in the first exercise, and we think that could kind of grow and build on itself and become a good driver. So the more that we reach out and have community and attention to public education, I think the more people will see how important it is and will make it better overall.
And the great things that are happening in our public schools too.
And all the great things.
See, politics and social values, that wasn't so bad, was it? All right, what did you remind me? You guys have, technology and science.
Okay, in keeping for time, we only decided to come up with 3 factors. So under technology and science, we listed social media and internet. It's kind of both a barrier and an asset that we can pull from. Someone at our table mentioned using social media and cell phones to help drive student learning, but then of course, I'm sure every educator knows that cell phones are about the bane of everyone else's existence. That's a very, very specific example, but the way that technology and social media can bring people together and promote connections with each other, and around the world, but also they threaten those connections because then you don't have as much face-to-face interaction a lot of the time. We also decided that climate change was both a driver and a barrier to success. We did list that science deniers would be listed as a barrier to success. And then we also listed money, because technology is not cheap. And so the way that money is allocated for access to and maintenance of supplies, materials, etc.
Yeah, nice job.
Thank you.
So basically what they just said, times two. We had student engagement. Obviously, technology can be used in successful ways to engage our students. It connects us globally. It opens up our classroom to an entire world that they normally wouldn't get to experience if we weren't able to use the technology. It provides us STEAM, because that's the E in STEAM is, or the T in STEAM is technology. And we have a lot of that going on right now. For those of you that don't know what STEAM is, it's science, technology, engineering, art, and math integration. And that can be a great equalizer for students because it gets so well-rounded, and we have it in place already. Some barriers: cost, money. Always need more money for the biggest and best technology. Then we had a couple things we thought could be both. Technology changes quickly. Predicting what the technology is going to be in 5 years and purchasing such technology can be a barrier, but it also can be a driver because it changes so quickly. It keeps us on our toes and keeps us relevant. And then we got to climate change, and we felt like we were not as science heavy as we should be, but technology and science kind of go hand in hand. And so we have climate change obviously for both. Also, it's definitely a barrier, but then it also provides opportunity for learning and overcoming and innovation.
Last but not least, legislation and regulation, the easy topic, right?
So we have the exciting topic of legislation and regulations, but so barriers, we think in the next 5 years that with the current administration and I think just around the country, the elevation of the private schools and tax credits and that sort of thing could be siphoning money away from the public school systems as that potentially is expanded. The reliance on the property tax and the inability of schools because of state control to be able to do any alternative sources of funding and the current caps on the property taxes that a school can levy. So you have total inability to be creative in your own district as to what you'd like to fund. And the state control prevents any of that from happening statewide. Current bond fatigue because of the parks bond, school bond, open space bond, and the library bond out there. I think in the next several years, because of all the fixed income people, you're going to have that bond fatigue. So the ability to go out and potentially pass a bond is even more difficult in a progressive town, even like Missoula. And then public transportation, potentially try to get those kids out into those creative, natural, or other environments. It can be a barrier, as well as if we can find the money to do that, maybe from the private sector, the business community, et cetera, to be able to get kids into those creative environments, then it'll be a driver. The testing analysis shift, we felt, because if you've read, there's a brand new book out about that issue in the ACT and the SAT, a lot of the Ivy League colleges are currently scrapping their use of the SAT and the ACT. So as we heard in our previous discussion here, people are, why are we worried about the testing in the old ways? And because it's not really testing what kids are learning potentially. So the movement away from that hopefully will allow the school districts to be able to get into more of that performance-based testing and testing the whole child and through essays and those kind of things, as opposed to some objective tests. So we think that's a potential driver that might be available in the next 5 to 10 years. The university enrollment and focus on a resource shift. So we think with the dual credit and the ability to use technology to get AP classes and those kind of classes through the the university systems and colleges, I think, is going to be definitely in the next several years exploding, and so we think that's a positive. And then we think there ought to be a dope tax, you know, so that at some point the cannabis tax that the legislature refused to pass might be something that could bring a lot of revenue to local school districts, as long as they make sure they direct the funding to the local community that passes the tax, or if it's a state tax, that money stays local.
Nice job. Okay, our last table. Still the exciting topic of legislation and regulation.
This is a little bit outside my wheelhouse. We had a lot to say that's in red, and those are the barriers. So I'll start with the drivers. We decided that some drivers for success would be safer school measures, and when it exists, accessible healthcare. Barriers, it turns out there's a lot. Starting at the top, when we talk about pre-K funding at the state level, lack of funding for that kind of initiative would be a barrier. Loss of recent grant monies, funding for free lunches across the school system. Turns out there's some stuff that, there's a lot of stuff I didn't know about. One is that there's some regulation regarding certification of teachers transferring into the state of Montana. So some teachers who are certified in other states are not able to transfer their certifications to Montana and teach here. And that reduces the ability to bring in, diverse voices into our communities. So, changes to state Medicaid is another barrier. The recent Supreme Court case regarding tax credits to private schools that was brought up by the other group. And then changes to the funding for free dual enrollment courses at the state level that is sunsetting. That's a 1-2 free, is that what it's called? And there's no replacement for that currently. So that's what we got.
Good, nice job. How do you like that? It's 8 o'clock.
Marcia.
Workshop and we have a forum, so public comment on any non-agenda item that you want to talk about, anything we haven't talked about.
Hola, buenas noches. Me llamo Nicolás Salmón. Yo vivo en Missoula, Montana, y trabajo con escuelas en comunidades alrededor del mundo, en 6 continentes, 14 países y 35 estados in los Estados Unidos. My name is Nick Salmon. I live here in Missoula. I work with schools and communities all around the world. Every continent but Antarctica, and in about 14 different countries in 35 states in the U.S. I've probably been to about 7,000 learning environments around the country, around the world. And I just want to tell you one quick story. There's a school that I work with in Australia that has disrupted many of the norms of what we expect school to look like, including the way the school day, week, and year are structured. And almost every term, they interrupt that with a festival of creativity. Particularly in their secondary schools, students are working in an interdisciplinary manner on projects that are of either personal, local, cultural, or global relevance to the young people. They determine what the projects will be, and the adults join them. The adults join them in areas that they do not have expertise. The science teacher is working in the food lab. The math teacher is in the art room. The French teacher is in the garden for 7 days. It's not a perfect system, but each of the 7 days that they do that, there are 0 behavioral referrals to any administrator. There's no request to meet with a counselor because students are too stressed out. There are high levels of engagement, and I would say that they have pretty much inverted what we would normally see. 80% of the kids are highly involved in what they're doing. 20% not so much, but I would say based on all those other 7,000 learning environments that I've been to, I see the inverse in a typical school. 20% of the kids kind of engaged, 80% don't care. So I just want to encourage you to tell the story of our future. I won't be here in March. I'll be working down in San Diego. But describe that future as vividly as possible, as Deb has suggested that we do, because that's what's going to trigger the parts of our brain that make us want to make that happen. But also cull our current practices that are preventing us from getting to that future, and that's the hard work. It's easy to just, well, it's not easy. It's really important to describe that future in a way that we all can't wait to get there. But the hard work is to let go of things like 7-hour school days that begin at 8:05 in the morning, things like that. And letting bus schedules and things like that drive learning. So I hope everybody has a great time in a couple weeks and really shapes a fantastic vision of the future. Thank you.
Just closing comment. Number one, I very much appreciate all of your time tonight. I, again, love doing this work, love hearing what you come up with, and I appreciate Nick's comments. And hopefully all of you can be here for our March meeting. Pat will get you out information on the March meeting. I also want to give a shout out to Ann Wake, who's sitting in the back, my favorite redhead. Ann is a trustee on the Missoula County Public Schools Board of Trustees. She's also an officer with MTSBA. And now she's our immediate past president. But I just want you to know how important she is. She represents this school system, this community, and each child across the state of Montana very well. So thank you, Ann. Appreciate it. And with that, I'm done for today.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
See you in March.